Good evening from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 6:55 p.m. on the 2nd of September 2024. And I decided, because I was rambling on about it in my last video that I finished today's readings, about reading from, some of my favourite story books and authors and those who tend to write about supernatural, mystical, mythical themes. And I've decided I'm going to go ahead and do that. I did do a reading before from the fantasy worlds of Peter S. Beagle. And it was the video's up here on YouTube, Come Lady Death, which was a delightful story. And I thought I would read you The Last Unicorn, which I'm going to have to split up into various parts because it's actually book length in itself. It's that many pages. So I'll read it to you because it's a wonderful story. I actually bought this book when I was about 15 or 16 many years ago back in New Zealand. And I've cherished it all these years, and I haven't really gone back and read it for decades. So it's been fun actually to revisit some of the wonderful stories and his quirky sense of reality. Wonderful writer, a Jewish writer, I believe. He may not be, but some of the names he uses and words he uses are kind of Yiddishkeit references, so I'm assuming he's Jewish. He may not be though. But anyway, he's a wonderful writer, and I still remember reading this story, The Last Unicorn, as a teenager, and getting very kind of moved by it. Very poignant story. So let us begin. The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle, and the drawings are quite lovely too. There's ravens and the unicorns and a wolf at the top. It's just so beautifully done. And I'm in the mood to read to you. So let us begin, beautiful people of planet Earth. Chapter 1. The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. She was very old, though she did not know it, and she was no longer the colourless colour of sea foam, but rather the colour of snow falling on a moonlit night. But her eyes were still clear and unwearied, and she still moved like a shadow on the sea. She did not look anything like a horned horse, as unicorns are often pictured, being smaller and cloven-hoofed and possessing that oldest, wildest grace that horses have never had, that deer have only in a shy, thin imitation, and goats in dancing mockery. Her neck was long and slender, making her head seem smaller than it was, and the mane that fell almost to the middle of her back was as soft as dandelion fluff and as fine as cirrus. She had pointed ears and thin legs, with feathers of white hair at the ankles, and the long horn above her eyes shone and shivered with its own seashell light, even in the deepest midnight. She had killed dragons with it, and healed a king whose poisoned wound would not close, and knocked down ripe chestnuts for bear cubs. Unicorns are immortal. It is their nature to live alone in one place, usually a forest where there is a pool clear enough for them to see themselves for they are a little vain, knowing themselves to be the most beautiful creatures in all the world, and magic besides. They mate very rarely, and no place is more enchanted. I'm trying not to laugh, I could say that about myself actually, but never mind. Shh, shh, shh. The story's not about me, people of Earth. They mate very rarely, and no place is more enchanted than one where a unicorn has been born. The last time she had seen another unicorn, the young virgins, who still came seeking her now and then, had called to her in a different tongue. But then she had no idea of months and years and centuries, or even of seasons. It was always spring in her forest because she lived there, and she wandered all day among the great beech trees, keeping watch over the animals that lived in the ground and under bushes, in nests and caves, earths and treetops. Generation after generation, wolves and rabbits alike, they hunted and loved and had children and died. And as the unicorn did none of these things, she never grew tired of watching them. Oh. One day it happened that two men with long bows rode through her forest hunting for deer. The unicorn followed them, moving so warily that not even the horses knew she was near. The sight of men filled her with an old, slow, strange mixture of tenderness and terror. She never let one see her if she could help it, but she liked to watch them ride by and hear them talking. I mislike the feel of this forest, the elder of the two hunters grumbled. Creatures that live in a unicorn's wood learn a little magic of their own in time, mainly concerned with disappearing. We'll find no game here. Unicorns are long gone, the second man said, if indeed they ever were. This is a forest, like any other. Then why do the leaves never fall here, or the snow? I tell you, there is one unicorn left in the world. Good luck to the lonely old thing, I say. And as long as it lives in this forest, there won't be a hunter who takes so much as a titmouse home at his saddle. Ride on, you'll see. I know their way, unicorns. From books, answered the other. Only from books and tales and songs. Not in the reign of 3 kings has there been even a whisper of a unicorn seen in this country or any other. You know more about unicorns than I do, for I've read the same books and heard the same stories, and I've never seen one either. The first hunter was silent for a time, and the second whistled sourly to himself. Then the first said, My great-grandmother saw a unicorn once. She used to tell me about it when I was little. Oh, indeed. And did she capture it with a golden bridle? No, she didn't have one. You don't have to have a golden bridle to catch a unicorn. That part's the fairy tale. You need only to be pure of heart. Yes, yes, the younger man chuckled. Did she ride her unicorn then, bareback under the trees like a nymph in the early days of the world? My great-grandmother was afraid of large animals, said the first hunter. She didn't ride it, but she sat very still, and the unicorn put its head in her lap and fell asleep. My great-grandmother never moved till it woke. What did it look like? Pliny describes the unicorn as being very ferocious, similar in the rest of its body to a horse, with the head of a deer, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a bear, a deep bellowing voice, and a single black horn, 2 cubits in length. And the Chinese, my great-grandmother said only that the unicorn had a good smell. She never could abide the smell of any beast, even a cat or a cow, let alone a wild thing. But she loved the smell of the unicorn. She began to cry once, telling me about it. Of course, she was a very old woman then, and cried at anything that reminded her of her youth. Let's turn around and hunt somewhere else, the second hunter said abruptly. The unicorn stepped softly into a thicket as they turned their horses and took up the trail only when they were well ahead of her once more. The men rode in silence until they were nearing the edge of the forest, when the second hunter asked quietly, "Why did they go away, do you think, if there ever were such things?" "Who knows? Times change. Would you call this age a good one for unicorns?" "No, but I wonder if any man before us ever thought his time a good time for unicorns. And it seems to me now that I've heard stories, but I was sleepy with wine, or I was thinking of something else." "Well, no matter. There's light enough yet to hunt if we hurry. Come." They broke out of the woods, kicked their horses to a gallop, and dashed away. But before they were out of sight, the first hunter looked back over his shoulder and called, just as though he could see the unicorn standing in shadow, "Stay where you are, poor beast. This is no world for you. Stay in your forest and keep your trees green and your friends long-lived. Pay no mind to young girls, for they never become anything more than silly old women. And good luck to you." The unicorn stood still at the edge of the forest and said aloud, "I am the only unicorn there is." They were the first words she had spoken, even to herself, in more than 100 years. That can't be, she thought. She had never minded being alone, never seeing another unicorn, because she had always known that there were others like her in the world, and a unicorn needs no more than that for company. But I would know if all the others were gone, I'd be gone too. Nothing can happen to them that does not happen to me. Her own voice frightened her and made her want to be running. She moved along the dark paths of her forest, swift and shining, passing through sudden clearings, unbearably brilliant with grass or soft with shadow, aware of everything around her, from the weeds that brushed her ankles to insect-quick flickers of blue and silver as the wind lifted the leaves. Oh, I could never leave this. I never could, not if I really were the only unicorn in the world. I know how to live here. I know how everything smells and tastes and is. What could I ever search for in the world except this again? But when she stopped running at last and stood still, listening to crows and a quarrel of squirrels over her head, she wondered, but suppose they are riding together somewhere far away? What if they are hiding and waiting for me? From that first moment of doubt, there was no peace for her. From the time she first imagined leaving her forest, she could not stand in one place without wanting to be somewhere else. She trotted up and down beside her pool, restless and unhappy. Unicorns are not meant to make choices. She said no and yes and no again, day and night, and for the first time she began to feel the minutes crawling over her like worms. I will not go, because men have seen no unicorns for a while does not mean they have all vanished. Even if it were true, I would not go. I live here. But at last she woke up in the middle of one warm night and said, yes, but now. She hurried through her forest, trying to look at nothing and smell nothing, trying not to feel her earth under her cloven hoofs. The animals who move in the dark, the owls and the foxes and the deer, raised their heads as she passed by, but she would not look at them. I must go quickly, she thought, and come back as soon as I can. Maybe I won't have to go very far. But whether I find the others or not, I will come back very soon as I can. Under the moon, the road that ran from the edge of her forest gleamed like water, but when she stepped out into it, away from the trees, she felt how hard it was and how long. She almost turned back then, but instead she took a deep breath of the wood's air that still drifted to her and held it in her mouth like a flower as long as she could. The long road hurried to nowhere and had no end. It ran through villages and small towns, flat country and mountains, stony barrens and meadows springing out of stones. But it belonged to none of these, and it never rested anywhere. It rushed the unicorn along, tugging at her feet like the tide, fretting at her, never letting her be quiet and listen to the air as she was used to do. Her eyes were always full of dust, and her mane was stiff and heavy with dirt. Time had always passed her by in her forest, but now it was she who passed through time as she travelled. The colours of the trees changed, and the animals along the way grew heavy coats and lost them again. The clouds crept or hurried before the changing winds and were pink and gold in the sun, or livid with storm. Wherever she went, she searched for her people, but she found no trace of them, and in all the tongues she heard spoken along the road, there was not even a word for them any more. Early one morning, about to turn off the road to sleep, she saw a man hoeing in his garden. Knowing that she should hide, she stood still instead and watched him work, until he straightened and saw her. He was fat and his cheeks jumped with every step he took. "Oh," he said, "oh, you're beautiful." When he tugged off his belt, made a loop in it, and moved clumsily toward her, the unicorn was more pleased than frightened. The man knew what she was and what he himself was for, to hoe turnips and pursue something that shone and could run faster than he could. She sidestepped his first lunge as lightly as though the wind of it had blown her out of his reach. "I have been hunted with bells and banners in my time," she told him. "Men knew that the only way to hunt me was to make the chase so wondrous that I would come near to see it, and even so, I was never once captured." "My foot must have slipped," said the man. "Steady now, you pretty thing." "I've never really understood," the unicorn mused as the man picked himself up, "what you dream of doing with me once you've caught me." The man leaped again, and she slipped away from him like rain. "I don't think you know yourselves," she said. "Ah, steady, steady, easy now." The man's sweating face was striped with dirt, and he could hardly get his breath. "Pretty," he gasped. "You pretty little mare." "Mare?" The unicorn trumpeted the word so shrilly that the man stopped pursuing her and clapped his hands to his ears. "Mare?" she demanded. "I, a horse? Is that what you take me for? Is that what you see?" "Good horse," the fat man panted. He leaned on the fence and wiped his face. "Curry you up, clean you off, you'll be the prettiest old mare anywhere." He reached out with the belt again. "Take you to the fair," he said. "Come on, horse." "A horse?" the unicorn said. "That's what you were trying to capture? A white mare with her mane full of burrs?" As the man approached her, she hooked her horn through the belt, jerked it out of his grasp, and hurled it across the road into a patch of daisies. "A horse am I," she snorted. "A horse indeed." For a moment the man was very close to her, and her great eyes stared into his own, which was small and tired and amazed. Then she turned and fled up the road, running so swiftly that those who saw her exclaimed, "Now there's a horse, there's a real horse." One old man said quietly to his wife, "That's an Arab horse. I was on a ship with an Arab horse once." From that time, the unicorn avoided towns, even at night, unless there was no way at all to go around them. Even so, there were a few men who gave chase, but always to a wandering white mare, never in the gay and reverent manner proper to the pursuit of a unicorn. They came with ropes and nets and baits of sugar lumps, and they whistled and called her Bess and Nellie. Sometimes she would slow down enough to let their horses catch her scent, and then watch as the beasts reared and wheeled and ran away with their terrified riders. The horses always knew her. How can it be, she wondered? I suppose I could understand it if men had simply forgotten unicorns, or if they had changed so that they hated all unicorns now and tried to kill them when they saw them. But not to see them at all, to look at them and see something else. What do they look like to one another then? What do trees look like to them? Or houses, or real horses, or their own children? Sometimes, she thought, if men no longer know what they are looking at, there may well be unicorns in the world yet, unknown and glad of it. But she knew beyond both hope and vanity that men had changed and the world with them, because the unicorns were gone. Yet she went on along the hard road, although each day she wished a little more that she had never left her forest. Then one afternoon, the butterfly wobbled out of a breeze and lit on the tip of her horn. He was velvet all over, dark and dusty, with golden spots on his wings, and he was as thin as a flower petal. Dancing along her horn, he saluted her with his curling feelers. "I am a roving gambler. How do you do?" The unicorn laughed for the first time in her travels. "Butterfly, what are you doing out on such a windy day?" she asked him. "You'll take cold and die long before your time." "Death takes what man would keep," said the butterfly, "and leaves what man would lose. Blow, wind, and crack your cheeks. I warm my hands before the fire of life and get four-way relief." He glimmered like a scrap of owlite on her horn. "Do you know what I am, butterfly?" the unicorn asked hopefully, and he replied, "Excellent, well. You're a fishmonger. You're my everything. You are my sunshine. You are old and grey and full of sleep. You're my pickle face, consumptive Mary Jane." He paused, fluttering his wings against the wind and added conversationally, "Your name is a golden bell hung in my heart. I would break my body to pieces to call you once by your name." "Say my name then," the unicorn begged him. "If you know my name, tell it to me." "Rumpelstiltskin," the butterfly answered happily. "Gotcha! You don't get no medal." He jigged and twinkled on her horn, singing, "Won't you come home, Bill Bailey? Won't you come home, where once he could not go? Buckle down, windsocky, go and catch a falling star. Clay lies still, but blood's a rover. So I should be called Kill Devil all the parish over." His eyes were gleaming scarlet in the glow of the unicorn's horn. She sighed and plodded on, both amused and disappointed. "It serves you right," she told herself. "You know better than to expect a butterfly to know your name. All they know are songs and poetry and anything else they hear. They mean well, but they can't keep things straight. Why should they? They die so soon." The butterfly swaggered before her eyes, singing, "1, 2, 3, O'Leary," as he whirled, chanting, "Not, I'll not, carrion comfort, look down that lonesome road, for oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er who dotes yet doubts. Hasten, mirth, and bring with thee a host of furious fancies, whereof I am commander, which will be on sale for 3 days only at bargain summer prices. I love you, I love you. Oh, the horror, and aroint thee, witch, aroint thee, indeed, and truly you've chosen a bad place to be lame in, willow, willow, willow." His voice tinkled in the unicorn's head like silver money falling. He travelled with her for the rest of the waning day, but when the sun went down and the sky was full of rosy fish, he flew off her horn and hovered in the air before her. "I must take the A train," he said politely. Against the clouds she could see that his velvet wings were ribbed with delicate black veins. "Farewell," she said. "I hope you hear many more songs," which was the best way she could think of to say goodbye to a butterfly. But instead of leaving her, he fluttered above her head, looking suddenly less dashing and a little nervous in the blue evening air. "Fly away," she urged him. "It's too cold for you to be out." But the butterfly still dallied, humming to himself. "They ride that horse you call the Macedoni," he intoned absent-mindedly, and then very clearly, "Unicorn, Old French, unicorn, Latin, unicornus, literally one-horned, unus, one, and cornu, a horn. A fabulous animal resembling a horse with one horn. Oh, I am a cook and a captain bold and the mate of the Nancy brig. Has anyone here seen Kelly? He strutted joyously in the air, and the first fireflies blinked around him in wonder and grave doubt. The unicorn was so startled and so happy to hear her name spoken at last that she overlooked the remark about the horse. "Oh, you do know me," she cried, and the breath of her delight blew the butterfly 20 feet away. When he came scrambling back to her, she pleaded, "Butterfly, if you really know who I am, tell me if you have ever seen anyone like me. Tell me which way I must go to find them. Where have they gone?" "Butterfly, butterfly, where shall I hide?" he sang in the fading light. "The sweet and bitter fool will presently appear. Christ, that my love were in my arms and I in my bed again." He rested on the unicorn's horn once more, and she could feel him trembling. "Please," she said, "all I want to know is that there are other unicorns somewhere in the world. Butterfly, tell me that there are still others like me, and I will believe you and go home to my forest. I have been away so long, and I said that I would come back soon." "Over the mountains of the moon," the butterfly began, "down the valley of the shadow, ride, boldly ride." Then he stopped suddenly and said in a strange voice, "No, no, listen. Don't listen to me. Listen. You can find your people if you are brave. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. Let nothing you dismay, but don't be half safe." His wings brushed against the unicorn's skin. "The Red Bull?" she asked. "What is the Red Bull?" Fucking gives you wings, doesn't it? Literally. The heart attacks. Sighs. The butterfly started to sing. "Follow me down, follow me down, follow me down, follow me down." But then he shook his head wildly and recited, "His firstling bull has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall push the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. Listen, listen, listen quickly." "I am listening," the unicorn cried. "Where are my people, and what is the Red Bull?" But the butterfly swooped close to her ear, laughing. "I have nightmares about crawling around on the ground," he sang. "The little dogs, Trey, Blanche, Sue, they bark at me. The little snakes, they hiss at me. The beggars are coming to town. Then at last come the clams." For a moment more he danced in the dusk before her. Then he shivered away into the violet shadows by the roadside, chanting defiantly, "It's you or me, moth, hand to hand, to hand to hand, to hand." The last the unicorn saw of him was a tiny skittering between the trees, and her eyes might have deceived her, for the night was full of wings now. At least he did recognize me, she thought sadly. That means something. But she answered herself, no, that means nothing at all, except that somebody once made up a song about unicorns or a poem. But the red bull, what could he have meant by that? Another song, I suppose. She walked on slowly and the night drew close about her. The sky was low and almost pure black, save for one spot of yellowing silver where the moon paced behind the thick clouds. The unicorn sang softly to herself, a song she had heard a young girl singing in her forest long ago. Sparrows and cats will live in my shoe sooner than I will live with you. Fish will come walking out of the sea sooner than you will come back to me. She did not understand the words, but the song made her think longingly of her home. It seemed to her that she had heard autumn beginning to shake the beech trees the very moment that she stepped out into the road. At last she lay down in the cold grass and fell asleep. Unicorns are the wariest of all wild things, but they sleep soundly when they sleep. All the same, if she had not been dreaming of home, she would surely have roused at the sound of wheels and jingling coming closer through the night, even though the wheels were muffled in rags and the little bells wrapped in wool. But she was very far away, farther than the soft bells could go, and she did not wake. There were 9 wagons, each draped in black, each drawn by a lean black horse, and each bearing barred sides like teeth when the wind blew through the black hangings. The lead wagon was driven by a squat old woman, and it bore signs on its shrouded sides that said in big letters, Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival. And below, in smaller print, creatures of night brought to light. When the first wagon drew even with the place where the unicorn lay asleep, the old woman suddenly pulled her black horse to a stop. All the other wagons stopped too, and waited silently as the old woman swung herself to the ground with an ugly grace. Gliding close to the unicorn, she peered down at her for a long time and then said, well, bless my old husk of a heart, and here I thought I'd seen the last of them. Her voice left a flavour of honey and gunpowder on the air. If he knew, she said, and she showed pebbly teeth as she smiled. But I don't think I'll tell him. She looked back at the black wagons and snapped her fingers twice. The drivers of the second and third wagons got down and came toward her. One was short and dark and stony, like herself. The other was a tall, thin man with an air of resolute bewilderment. He wore an old black cloak, and his eyes were green. What do you see? The old woman asked the short man. Ruch, what do you see lying there? Dead horse, he answered. No, not dead. Give it to the manticore or the dragon. His chuckle sounded like matches striking. You're a fool, Mommy Fortuna said to him. Then to the other, what about you? wizard, seer, taumaturge? I don't know how to pronounce that word. Thaumaturge. Taumaturge? I'm getting warmer, aren't I? Never mind. I'll have to also find out what that exactly means. What do you see with your sorcerer's sight? She joined with the man Ruch in a ratchety roar of laughter, but it ended when she saw that the tall man was still staring at the unicorn. "Answer me, you juggler," she snarled, but the tall man did not turn his head. The old woman turned it for him, reaching out a crab-like hand to yank his chin around. His eyes fell before her yellow stare. "A horse," he muttered. "A white mare." Mommy Fortuna looked at him for a long time. "You're a fool too, magician," she snickered at last, "but a worse fool than Ruch, and a more dangerous one. He lies only out of greed, but you lie out of fear. Or could it be kindness?" The man said nothing, and Mommy Fortuna laughed by herself. "All right," she said. "It's a white mare. I want her for the carnival. The 9th cage is empty." "I'll need rope," Ruch said. He was about to turn away, but the old woman stopped him. "The only rope that could hold her," he told him, "would be the cord with which the old gods bound the Fenris wolf. That one was made of fish's breath, bird spittle, a woman's beard, the meowing of a cat, the sinews of a bear, and one thing more, I remember. Mountain roots. Having none of these elements, nor dwarfs to weave them for us, we'll have to do the best we can with iron bars. I'll put a sleep on her thus," and Mommy Fortuna's hands knitted the night air while she grumbled a few unpleasant words in her throat. There was a smell of lightning about the unicorn when the old woman had finished her spell. "Now cage her," she said to the two men. "She'll sleep till sunrise, whatever racket you make, unless, in your accustomed stupidity, you touch her with your hands. Take the 9th cage to pieces and build it around her, but beware. The hand that so much as brushes her mane turns instantly to the donkey's hoof it deserves to be." Again she gazed mockingly at the tall, thin man. "Your little tricks would be even harder for you than they already are, wizard," she said, wheezing. "Get to work. There's not much dark left." When she was well out of earshot, sliding back into the shadow of her wagon as though she had just come out to mark the hour, the man named Ruch spat and said curiously, "Now I wonder what's worrying the old squid. What would it matter if we touched the beast?" The magician answered him in a voice almost too soft to be heard. The touch of a human hand would wake her out of the deepest sleep the devil himself could lay on her. And Mommy Fortuna's no devil. She'd like us to think so, the dark man sneered. Donkey hoofs. Gah! But he thrust his hands deep into his pockets. Why would the spell be broken? It's just an old white mare. But the magician was walking away toward the last of the black wagons. Hurry, he called over his shoulder. It will be day soon. It took them the rest of the night to pull down the 9th cage, bars and floor and roof, and then to put it back together around the sleeping unicorn. Ruth was tugging at the door to make sure that it was securely locked when the grey trees in the east boiled over and the unicorn opened her eyes. The two men slipped hurriedly away, but the tall magician looked back in time to see the unicorn rise to her feet and stare at the iron bars, her low head swaying like the head of an old white horse. Chapter 2. The 9 black wagons of the midnight carnival seemed smaller by daylight and not menacing at all, but flimsy and fragile as dead leaves. Their draperies were gone, and they were now adorned with sad black banners cut from blankets and stubby black ribbons that twitched in the breeze. They were arranged strangely in a scrubby field, a pentacle of cages enclosing a triangle, and Mommy Fortuna's wagon lumping in the centre. This cage alone retained its black veil, concealing whatever it contained. Mommy Fortuna was nowhere to be seen. The man named Ruch was leading a straggling crowd of country folk slowly from one cage to the next, commenting soberly on the beasts within. This here's the manticore, man's head, lion's body, tail of a scorpion. Captured at midnight, eating werewolves to sweeten its breath. Creatures of night brought to light. Here's the dragon. Breathes fire now and then, usually at people who poke it, little boy. Its inside is an inferno, but its skin is so cold it burns. The dragon speaks 17 languages badly and is subject to gout, the satyr. Ladies keep back, a real troublemaker. Captured under curious circumstances, revealed to gentlemen only for a token fee after the show. Creatures of night. Standing by the unicorn's cage, which was one of the inner 3, the tall magician watched the procession proceeding around the pentacle. I shouldn't be here, he said to the unicorn. The old woman warned me to stay away from you. He chuckled pleasantly. She has mocked me from the day I joined her, but I have made her nervous all that time. The unicorn hardly heard him. She turned and turned in her prison, her body shrinking from the touch of the iron bars all around her. No creature of man's night loves cold iron, and while the unicorn could endure its presence, the murderous smell of it seemed to turn her bones to sand and her blood to rain. The bars of her cage must have had some sort of spell on them, for they never stopped whispering evilly to one another in clawed, pattering voices. The heavy lock giggled and whined like a mad monkey. "Tell me what you see," said the magician, as Mommy Fortuna had said it to him. "Look at your fellow legends and tell me what you see." Ruch's iron voice came clanging through the wan afternoon. "Gatekeeper of the underworld, 3 heads and a healthy coat of vipers, as you can see. Last seen above ground in the time of Hercules, who dragged him up under one arm. But we lured him to light again with promises of a better life. Cerberus, look at those 6 cheated red eyes. You may look into them again one day. This way to the Midgard serpent. This way." The unicorn stared through the bars at the animal in the cage. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "It's only a dog," she whispered. "It's a hungry, unhappy dog with only 1 head and hardly any coat at all. The poor thing. How could they ever take it for Cerberus? Are they all blind?" "Look again," the magician said. "And the satyr," the unicorn continued. "The satyr is an old ape with a twisted foot. The dragon is a crocodile, much more likely to breathe fish than fire, and the great manticore is a lion, a perfectly good lion, but no more monstrous than the others. I don't understand." "It's got the whole world in its coils," Ruth was droning, and once more the magician said, "Look again." Then, as though her eyes were getting used to darkness, the unicorn began to perceive a second figure in each cage. They loomed hugely over the captives of the midnight carnival, and yet they were joined to them, stormy dreams sprung from a grain of truth. So there was a manticore, famine-eyed, slobber-mouthed, roaring, curving its deadly tail over his back until the poisoned spine lolled and nodded just above his ear. And there was a lion too, tiny and absurd by comparison, yet they were the same creature. The unicorn stamped in wonder. It was so in all the other cages. The shadow dragon opened his mouth and hissed harmless fire to make the gapers gasp and cringe, while hell's snake-furred watchdog howled triple dooms and devastations down on his betrayers, and the satyr limped leering to the bars and beckoned young girls to impossible delights right there in public. As for the crocodile, the ape, and the sad dog, they faded steadily before the marvellous phantoms until they were only shadows themselves, even to the unicorn's undeceived eyes. "This is a strange sorcery," she said softly. "There's more meaning than magic to this." The magician laughed with pleasure and great relief. Well said indeed. I know the old horror wouldn't dazzle you with her tuppenny spells." His voice grew hard and secret. "She's made her 3rd mistake now," he said, "and that's at least too many for a tired old trickster like herself. The time draws near." The time draws near, Ruth was telling the crowd as though he had overheard the magician. A Ragnarok. On that day when the gods fall, the serpent of the Midgard will spit a storm of venom at great Thor himself, till he tumbles over like a poisoned fly. And so he waits for Judgment Day and dreams about the part he'll play. It may be so, I couldn't say. Creatures of night brought to light. The cage was filled with snake. There was no head to it and no tail. Nothing but a wave of tarnished darkness rolling from one end of the cage to the other, leaving no room for anything but its own thunderous breathing. Only the unicorn saw, coiled in a corner, a baleful boa, brooding perhaps over its own judgment on the midnight carnival. But it was tiny and dim as the ghost of a worm in the serpent's shadow. A wondering Gork stuck up his hand and demanded of Ruch, if this big snake do be coiled around the world as you say, how come you to be having a piece of it in your wagon? And if it can shatter the sea just by stretching of itself, what's to keep it from crawling off wearing your whole show like a necklace? There were murmurs of agreement, and some of the murmurers began to back warily away. I'm glad you asked me that, friend, Ruch said with a scowl. It just so happens that the Midgard serpent exists in like another space from ours, another dimension. Normally, therefore, he's invisible, but dragged into our world as Thor hooked him once. He shows clear as lightning, which also visits us from someplace else, where it might look quite different. And naturally, he might turn nasty if he knew that a bit of his tummy slack was on view daily in Sundays in Mommy Fortuna's midnight carnival. But he don't know. He's got other things to think about than what becomes of his belly button, and we take our chances, as do you all, on his continued tranquility. He rolled and stretched the last word like dough, and his hearers laughed carefully. Spells of seeming, the unicorn said. She cannot make things. Nor truly change them, added the magician. Her shabby skill lies in disguise, and even that knack would be beyond her if it weren't for the eagerness of those gulls, those marks, to believe whatever comes easiest. She can't turn cream into butter, but she can give a lion the semblance of a manticore to eyes that want to see a manticore there, eyes that would take a real manticore for a lion, a dragon for a lizard, and the Midgard serpent for an earthquake, and a unicorn for a white mare. The unicorn halted in her slow, desperate round of the cage, realizing for the first time that the magician understood her speech. He smiled, and she saw that his face was frighteningly young for a grown man, untravelled by time, unvisited by grief or wisdom. I know you, he said. The bars whispered wickedly between them. Ruch was leading the crowd to the inner cages now. The unicorn asked the tall man, Who are you? I am called Schmendrick, the magician, he answered. You won't have heard of me. The unicorn came very near to explaining that it was hardly for her to have heard of one wizard or another, but something sad and valiant in his voice kept her from it. The magician said, I entertain the sightseers as they gather for the show. Miniature magic, sleight of hand, flowers to flags and flags to fish, all accompanied by persuasive patter and a suggestion that I could work more ominous wonders if I chose. It's not much of a job, but I've had worse, and I'll have better one day. This is not the end. But the sound of his voice made the unicorn feel as though she were trapped forever, and once more she began pacing her cage, moving to keep her heart from bursting with the terror of being closed in. Ruch was standing before a cage that contained nothing but a small brown spider weaving a modest web across the bars. Arachne of Lydia, he told the crowd. Guaranteed the greatest weaver in the world. Her fate's the proof of it. She had the bad luck to defeat the goddess Athena in a weaving contest. Athena was a sore loser, and Arachne is now a spider, creating only for Mommy Fortuna's midnight carnival by special arrangement. Warp of snow and woof of flame, and never any two the same. Arachne. Strung on the loom of iron bars, the web was very simple and almost colourless, except for an occasional rainbow shiver when the spider scuttled out onto it to put a thread right. But it drew the onlooker's eyes, and the unicorn's eyes as well, back and forth and steadily deeper, until they seemed to be looking down into great rifts in the world, black fissures that widened remorselessly and yet would not fall into pieces as long as Arachne's web held the world together. The unicorn shook herself free with a sigh and saw the real web again. It was very simple and almost colourless. It isn't like the others, she said. No, Schmendrick agreed grudgingly. But there's no credit due to Mommy Fortuna for that. You see, the spider believes. She sees those cats' cradles herself and thinks them her own work. Belief makes all the difference to magic like Mommy Fortuna's. Why, if that troop of witchlings withdrew their wonder, there'd be nothing left of all her witchery but the sound of a spider weeping, and no one would hear it. The unicorn did not want to look into the web again. She glanced at the cage closest to her own and suddenly felt the breath in her body turning to cold iron. There sat on an oaken perch a creature with the body of a great bronze bird and a hag's face, clenched and deadly as the talons with which she gripped the wood. She had the shaggy round ears of a bear, but down her scaly shoulders, mingling with the bright knives of her plumage, there fell hair the colour of moonlight, thick and youthful around the hating human face. She glittered, but to look at her was to feel the light going out of the sky. Catching sight of the unicorn, she made a queer sound like a hiss and a chuckle together. The unicorn said quietly, "This one is real. This is the harpy, Seleno." Schmendrick's face had gone the colour of oatmeal. "The old woman caught her by chance," he whispered, "asleep as she took you. But it was an ill fortune, and they both know it. Mommy Fortuna's craft is just sure enough to hold the monster, but its mere presence is wearing all her spells so thin that in a little time she won't have power enough left to fry an egg. She should never have done it, never meddled with a real harpy, a real unicorn. The truth melts her magic always, but she cannot keep from trying to make it serve her. But this time, "Sister of the Rainbow, believe it or not," they heard Ruch braying to the awed onlookers. "Her name means the Dark One, the one whose wings blacken the sky before a storm. She and her two sweet sisters nearly starved the king Phineas to death by snatching and befouling his food before he could eat it. But the sons of the north wind made them quit that, didn't they, my beauty?" The harpy made no sound, and Ruch grinned like a cage himself. "She put up a fiercer fight than in all the others put together," he went on. "It was like trying to bind all hell with a hair, but Mommy Fortuna's powers are great enough even for that. Creatures of night brought to light." "Polly want a cracker?" Few in the crowd laughed. The harpy's talons tightened on her perch until the wood cried out. "You'll need to be free when she frees herself," the magician said. "She mustn't catch you caged." "I dare not touch the iron," the unicorn replied. "My horn could open the lock, but I cannot reach it. I cannot get out." She was trembling with horror of the harpy, but her voice was quite calm. Schmendrick the magician drew himself up several inches taller than the unicorn would have thought possible. "Fear nothing," he began grandly. "For all my air of mystery, I have a feeling heart." But he was interrupted by the approach of Ruch and his followers, grown quieter than the grubby gang who had giggled at the manticore. The magician fled, calling back softly, "Don't be afraid. Schmendrick is with you. Do nothing till you hear from me." His voice drifted to the unicorn, so faint and lonely that she was not sure whether she actually heard it or only felt it brush against her. It was growing dark. The crowd stood in front of her cage, peering in at her with a strange shyness. Ruch said, "The unicorn," and stepped aside. She heard hearts bounce, tears brewing, and breath going backward. But no one said a word. By the sorrow and loss and sweetness in their faces, she knew that they recognized her, and she accepted their hunger as her homage. She thought of the hunter's great-grandmother and wondered what it must be like to grow old and to cry. Most shows, said Ruch after a time, would end here. But for what could they possibly present after a genuine unicorn? But Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival holds one more mystery yet, a demon more destructive than the dragon, more monstrous than the manticore, more hideous than the harpy, and certainly more universal than the unicorn. He waved his hand toward the last wagon, and the black hangings began to wriggle open, though there was no one pulling them. Behold her, Ruch cried. Behold the last, the very end. Behold Ellie. Inside the cage it was darker than the evening, and cold stirred behind the bars like a live thing. Something moved in the cold, and the unicorn saw Ellie, an old, bony, ragged woman who crouched in the cage, rocking and warming herself before a fire that was not there. She looked so frail that the weight of the darkness could have crushed her, and so helpless and alone that the watchers should have rushed forward in pity to free her. Instead, they began to back silently away, for all the world as though Ellie were stalking them. But she was not even looking at them. She sat in the dark and creaked a song to herself in a voice that sounded like a saw going through a tree, and like a tree getting ready to fall. What is plucked will grow again, what is slain lives on, what is stolen will remain, what is gone is gone. She doesn't look like much, does she? Ruch asked. But no hero can stand before her. No god can wrestle her down. No magic can keep her out or in, for she's no prisoner of ours. Even while we exhibit her here, she is walking among you, touching and taking, for Ellie is old age. The cold of the cage reached out to the unicorn, and wherever it touched her, she grew lame and feeble. She felt herself withering, loosening, felt her beauty leaving her with her breath. Ugliness swung from her mane, dragged down her head, stripped her tail, gaunted her body, ate up her coat, and ravaged her mind with remembrance of what she had once been. Somewhere nearby, the harpy made her low, eager sound, but the unicorn would gladly have huddled in the shadow of her bronze wings to hide from this last demon. Ellie's song soared away at her heart. What is sea-born dies on land, soft as trod upon. What is given bends the hand. What is gone is gone. The show was over. The crowd was stealing away. No one alone, but in couples and fews and severals. Strangers holding strangers' hands, looking back often to see if Ellie were following. Ruch called plaintively, "Won't the gentleman wait to hear the story about the satyr?" And sent a sour yowl of laughter chasing their slow flight. Creatures of night brought to light. They struggled through the stiffening air, past the unicorn's cage and on away, with Ruth's laughter yapping them home and Ellie still singing. This is illusion, the unicorn told herself. This is illusion. And somehow raised a head heavy with death to stare deep into the dark of the last cage and see not old age, but Mommy Fortuna herself, stretching and snickering and clambering to the ground with her old eerie ease. And the unicorn knew then that she had not become mortal and ugly at all, but she did not feel beautiful again. Perhaps that was illusion too, she thought wearily, having an epic fucking hot flush. I've got it on 24 degrees, but I'm burning. I'm burning, babies, burning. Right, where were we? I enjoyed that, Mommy Fortuna said to Ruch. I always do. I guess I'm just stage struck at heart. You better check on that damn harpy, Ruch said. I could feel her working loose this time. It was like I was a rope holding her and she was untying me. He shuddered and lowered his voice. Get rid of her, he said hoarsely, before she scatters us across the sky like bloody clouds. She thinks about it all the time. I can feel her thinking about it. Fool, be still, the witch's own voice was fierce with fear. I can turn her into wind if she escapes, or into snow, or into 7 notes of music, but I choose to keep her. No other witch in the world holds a harpy captive, and none ever will. I would keep her if I could do it only by feeding her a piece of your liver every day. Oh, that's nice, Ruth said. He sidled away from her. What if she only wanted your liver, he demanded. What would you do then? Feed her yours anyway, Mommy Fortuna said. She wouldn't know the difference. Harpies aren't bright. Alone in the my liver starts aching in sympathy at that. It's quite comical, isn't it? Settle down, liver. You're safe in there. Just no more sugar for you, baby girl. Alone in the moonlight, the old woman glided from cage to cage, rattling locks and prodding her enchantments as a housewife squeezes melons in the market. When she came to the harpy's cage, the monster made a sound as shrill as a spear and spread the horrid glory of its wings. For a moment it seemed to the unicorn that the bars of the cage began to wriggle and run like rain, but Mommy Fortuna crackled her twiggy fingers, and the bars were iron again, and the harpy sank down on its perch, waiting. "Not yet," the witch said, "not yet." They stared at each other with the same eyes. Mommy Fortuna said, "You're mine. If you kill me, you're mine." The harpy did not move, but a cloud put out the moon. "Not yet," Mommy Fortuna said, and she turned towards the unicorn's cage. "Well," she said in her sweet smoky voice, "I had you frightened for a little while, didn't I?" She laughed with a sound like snakes hurrying through mud and strolled closer. "Whatever your friend the magician may say," she went on, "I must have some small art after all to trick a unicorn into believing herself old and foul. That takes a certain skill, I'd say. Or is it a tuppenny spell that holds the dark one prisoner? No other, till I—" The unicorn replied, "Do not boast, old woman. Your death sits in that cage and hears you." "Yes," Mommy Fortuna said calmly, "but at least I know where it is. You were out on the road hunting for your own death." She laughed again. "And I know where that one is too. But I spared you the finding of it, and you should be grateful for that." Forgetting where she was, the unicorn pressed forward against the bars. They hurt her, but she did not draw back. "The Red Bull," she said. "Where can I find the Red Bull?" Mommy Fortuna stepped very close to the cage. "The Red Bull of King Haggard," she muttered. "So you know of the bull?" She showed 2 of her teeth. "Well, he'll not have you," she said. "You belong to me." The unicorn shook her head. "You know better," she answered gently. "Free the harpy while there is time, and set me free as well. Keep your poor shadows if you will, but let us go." The witch's stagnant eyes blazed up, so savagely bright that a ragged company of lunar moths off to a night's revel fluttered straight into them and sizzled into snowy ashes. "I'd quit show business first," she snarled, trudging through eternity, hauling my homemade horrors. "Do you think that was my dream when I was young and evil? Do you think I chose this meagre magic sprung of stupidity because I never knew the true witchery? I play tricks with dogs and monkeys because I cannot touch the grass, but I know the difference. And now you ask me to give up the sight of you, the presence of your power? I told Ruch I'd feed his liver to the harpy if I had to, And so I would. And to keep you, I'd take your friend Schmendrick, and I'd. She raged herself to gibberish, and at last to silence. Speaking of livers, the unicorn said, real magic can never be made by offering up someone else's liver. You must tear out your own and not expect to get it back. The true witches know that. A few grains of sand rustled down Mommy Fortuna's cheek as she stared at the unicorn. All witches weep like that. She turned and walked swiftly toward her wagon, but suddenly she turned again and grinned her rubbly grin. But I tricked you twice anyway, she said. Did you really think that those gogglers knew you for yourself without any help from me? No, I had to give you an aspect they could understand and a horn they could see. These days, it takes a cheap carnival witch to make folk recognize a real unicorn. You'd do much better to stay with me and be false, for in this whole world only the Red Bull will know you when he sees you. She disappeared into her wagon, and the harpy let the moon come out again. Chapter 3. Schmendrick came back a little before dawn, slipping between the cages as silently as water. Only the harpy made a sound as he went by. I couldn't get away any sooner, he told the unicorn. She's set Ruch to watching me, and he hardly ever sleeps. But I asked him a riddle, and it always takes him all night to solve riddles. Next time I'll tell him a joke and keep him busy for a week. The unicorn was grey and still. There is magic on me, she said. Why did you not tell me? I thought you knew, the magician answered gently. After all, didn't you wonder how it could be that they recognized you? Then he smiled, which made him look a little older. No, of course not. You never would wonder about that. There has never been a spell on me before, the unicorn said. Pardon me. She shivered long and deep. There has never been a world in which I was not known. I know exactly how you feel, Schmendrick said eagerly. The unicorn looked at him out of dark, endless eyes, and he smiled nervously and looked at his hands. It's a rare man who is taken for what he truly is, he said. There is much misjudgment in the world. Now I knew you for a unicorn when I first saw you, and I know that I am your friend. Yet you take me for a clown or a clod or a betrayer, and so must I be if you see me so. The magic on you is only magic and will vanish as soon as you are free, but the enchantment of error that you put on me, I must wear forever in your eyes. We are not always what we seem, and hardly ever what we dream. Still I have read or heard it sung that unicorns, when time was young, could tell the difference twixt the two, the false shining and the true. The lips laugh and the hearts Roo. His quiet voice lifted as the sky grew lighter, and for a moment the unicorn could not hear the bars whining or the soft ringing of the harpy's wings. "I think you are my friend," she said. "Will you help me?" "If not you, no one," the magician answered. "You are my last chance." One by one the sad beasts of the midnight carnival came whimpering, sneezing and shuddering awake. One had been dreaming of rocks and bugs and tender leaves, another of bounding through high, hot grass, a third of mud and blood, and one had dreamed of a hand scratching the lonely place behind its ears. Only the harpy had not slept, and now she sat staring into the sun without blinking. Schmendrick said, "If she frees herself first, we are lost." They heard Ruth's voice nearby. That voice always sounded nearby, calling, "Schmendrick! Hey, Schmendrick! I got it. It's a coffee pot, right?" The magician began to move slowly away. "Tonight," he murmured to the unicorn. "Trust me till dawn," and was gone with a flap and a scramble, seeming as before to leave part of himself behind. Ruch lurked by the cage a moment later, all deadly economy. Hidden in her black wagon, Mommy Fortuna grumbled Ellie's song to herself. "Here is there and high is low, all may be undone. What is true, no two men know. What is gone is gone." Soon a new catch of spectators began to come sauntering up to see the show. Ruch called them in, crying, "Creatures of night!" like an iron parrot, and Schmendrick stood on the box and did tricks. The unicorn watched him with great interest and a growing uncertainty, not of his heart, but of his craft. He made an entire sow out of a sow's ear, turned a sermon into a stone, a glass of water into a handful of water, a 5 of spades into a 12 of spades, and a rabbit into a goldfish that drowned. Each time he conjured up confusion. He glanced quickly at the unicorn with eyes that said, "Oh, but you know what I really did." Once he changed a dead rose into a seed. The unicorn liked that, even though it did turn out to be a radish seed. The show began again. Once more, Ruch led the crowd from one of Mommy Fortuna's poor fables to another. The dragon blazed, Cerberus howled for hell to come and help him, and the satyr tempted women until they wept. They squinted and pointed at the manticore's yellow tusks and swollen sting, grew still at the thought of the Midgard serpent, and wondered at Arachne's new web, which was like a fisherman's net with the dripping moon in it. Each of them took it for a real web, but only the spider believed that it held the real moon. This time, Ruch did not tell the story of King Phineas and the Argonauts. Indeed, he hurried his sightseers past the harpy's cage as quickly as he could, gabbling only her name and the meaning of it. The harpy smiled. Nobody saw her smile except the unicorn, and she wished she had chanced to be looking somewhere else at that time. When they stood in front of her cage, gazing silently in at her, the unicorn thought bitterly, "Their eyes are so sad. How much sadder would they be, I wonder, if the spell that disguises me dissolved and they were left staring at a common white mare. The witch is right. Not one would know me." But then a soft voice, rather like the voice of Schmendrick the magician, said inside her, "But their eyes are so sad." And when Roch shrieked, "Behold the very end!" and the black hangings slithered back to reveal Ellie, mumbling in the cold and the darkness, the unicorn felt the same helpless fear of growing old that set the crowd to flight, even though she knew that it was only Mommy Fortuna in the cage. She thought, "The witch knows more than she knows she knows." Night came quickly, perhaps because the harpy hurried it on. The sun sank into dirty clouds like a stone into the sea, and with about as much chance of rising again, and there was no moon or any stars. Mommy Fortuna made her gliding rounds of the cages. The harpy did not move when she drew near, and that made the old woman stand and stare at her for a long while. "Not yet," she muttered at last. "Not yet." But her voice was weary and doubtful. She peered briefly at the unicorn, her eyes a stir of yellow in the greasy gloom. "Well, one day more," she said in a crackling sigh, and turned away again. There was no sound in the carnival after she was gone. All the beasts were asleep, save the spider who wove and the harpy who waited. Yet the night creaked tighter and tighter until the unicorn expected it to split wide open, ripping a seam down the sky to reveal more bars, she thought. Where is the magician? At last he came, hurrying through the silence, spinning and dancing like a cat in the cold, stumbling over shadows. When he reached the unicorn's cage, he made a joyful bow to her and said proudly, "Schmendrick is with you." In the cage nearest to hers, the unicorn heard the edged shivering of bronze. "I think we have very little time," she said. "Can you truly set me free?" The tall man smiled, and even his pale, solemn fingers grew merry. "I told you that the witch has made 3 great mistakes. Your capture was the last, and the taking of the harpy the second, because you were both real. And Mommy Fortuna can no more make you hers than she can make the winter a day longer. But to take me for a mountebank like herself, that was her first and fatal folly. For I, too, am real. I am Schmendrick the magician, the last of the red-hot swamis, and I am older than I look." "Where is the other?" the unicorn asked. Schmendrick was pushing back his sleeves. "Don't worry about Ruch. I asked him another riddle, one that has no answer. He may never move again." He spoke 3 angled words and snapped his fingers. The cage disappeared. The unicorn found herself standing in a grove of trees, orange and lemon, pear, and pomegranate, almond and acacia, with soft spring earth under her feet and the sky growing over her. Her heart turned light as smoke, and she gathered up the strength of her body for a great bound into the sweet night. But she let the leap drift out of her untaken, for she knew, although she could not see them, that the bars were still there. She was too old not to know. "I'm sorry," Schmendrick said, somewhere in the dark. "I would have liked it to be that spell that freed you." Now he sang something cold and low, and the strange trees blew away like dandelion down. "This is a surer spell," he said. "The bars are now as brittle as old cheese, which I crumble and scatter so." Then he gasped and snatched his hands away. Each long finger was dripping blood. "I must have gotten the accent wrong," he said hoarsely. He hid his hands in his cloak and tried to make his voice light. "It comes and goes." A scratching of flinty phrases this time, and Schmendrick's bloody hands flickering across the sky, something grey and grinning, something like a bear, but bigger than a bear, something that chuckled muddily, came limping from somewhere, eager to crack the cage like a nut and pick out bits of the unicorn's flesh with its claws. Schmendrick ordered it back into the night, but it wouldn't go. The unicorn backed into a corner and lowered her head. But the harpy stirred softly in her cage, ringing, and the grey shape turned what must have been its head and saw her. It made a foggy, globbering sound of terror and was gone. The magician cursed and shivered. He said, "I called him up one other time long ago. I couldn't handle him then either. Now we owe our lives to the harpy, and she may yet come to call for them before the sun rises." He stood silent, twisting his wounded fingers, waiting for the unicorn to speak. "I'll try once more," he said finally. "Shall I try once more?" The unicorn thought that she could still see the night boiling where the grey thing had been. "Yes," she said. Schmendrick took a deep breath, spat 3 times, and spoke words that sounded like bells ringing under the sea. He scattered a handful of powder over the spittle and smiled triumphantly as it puffed up in a single silent flash of green. When the light had faded, he said 3 more words. They were like the noise bees might make buzzing on the moon. The cage began to grow smaller. The unicorn could not see the bars moving, but each time Schmendrick said, "Ah, no," she had less room in which to stand. Already she could not turn around. The bars were drawing in, pitiless as the tide or the morning, and they would shear through her until they surrounded her heart, which they would keep a prisoner forever. She had not cried out when the creature Schmendrick had summoned came, grinning towards her, but now she made a sound. It was small and despairing, but not yet yielding. Schmendrick stopped the bars, though she never knew how. If he spoke any magic, she had not heard it. But the cage stopped shrinking, a breath before the bars touched her body. She could feel them all the same, each one like a little cold wind, meowing with hunger. But they could not reach her. The magician's arms fell to his sides. "I dare no more," he said heavily. "The next time I might not be able." His voice trailed miserably away, and his eyes were as defeated as his hands. "The witch made no mistake in me," he said. "Try again," the unicorn said. "You are my friend. Try again." But Schmendrick, smiling bitterly, was fumbling through his pockets in search of something that clicked and clinked. "I knew it would come to this," he muttered. "I dreamed it differently, but I knew." He brought out a ring from which dangled several rusty keys. "You deserve the services of a great wizard," he said to the unicorn, "but I'm afraid you'll have to be glad of the aid of a second-rate pickpocket. Unicorns know naught of need or shame or doubt or debt, but mortals, as you may have noticed, take what they can get, and Ruch can only concentrate on one thing at a time." The unicorn was suddenly aware that every animal in the midnight carnival was awake, making no sound, but watching her. In the next cage, the harpy began to stamp slowly from one foot to the other. "Hurry," the unicorn said. "Hurry." Schmendrick was already fitting a key into the snickering lock. At his first attempt, which failed, the lock fell silent, but when he tried another key, it cried out loudly, "Ho, ho! Some magician, some magician." It had Mommy Fortuna's voice. "Ah, turn blue," the magician mumbled, but the unicorn could feel him blushing. He twisted the key, and the lock snapped open with one last grunt of contempt. Schmendrick swung the cage door wide and said softly, "Step down, lady. You are free." The unicorn stepped lightly to the ground, and Schmendrick the magician drew back in sudden wonder. "Oh," he whispered, "it was different when there were bars between us. You look smaller and not as... oh, oh my." She was home in her forest, which was black and wet and ruined because she had been gone so long. Someone was calling to her from a long way off, but she was home, warming the trees and waking the grass. Then she heard Ruth's voice like a boat bottom gritting on pebbles. "Okay, Schmendrick, I give up. Why is a raven like a writing desk?" The unicorn moved away into deeper shadow, and Ruth saw only the magician and the empty, dwindled cage. His hand jumped to his pocket and came away again. "Why, you thin thief," he said, grinning iron. "She'll string you on barbed wire to make a necklace for the harpy." He turned then and headed straight for Mommy Fortuna's wagon. "Run," the magician said. He made a frantic, foolish flying leap and landed on Ruth's back, hugging the dark man dumb and blind with his long arms. They fell together and Schmendrick scrambled up first, his knees nailing Ruth's shoulders to the earth. "Barbed wire," he gasped. "You pile of stones, you waste, you desolation. I'll stuff you with misery till it comes out of your eyes. I'll change your heart into green grass and all you love into a sheep. I'll turn you into a bad poet with dreams. I'll set all your toenails growing inward. You mess with me." Ruth shook his head and sat up, hurling Schmendrick 10 feet away. "What are you talking about?" he chuckled. "You can't turn cream into butter." The magician was getting to his feet, but Ruth pushed his back down and sat on him. "I never did like you," he said pleasantly. "You give yourself airs and you're not very strong." Heavy as night, his hands closed on the magician's throat. The unicorn did not see. She was out at the farthest cage where the manticore growled and whimpered and lay flat. She touched the point of her horn to the lock and was gone to the dragon's cage without looking back. One after another she set them all free, the satyr, Cerberus, the Midgard serpent. Their enchantments vanished as they felt their freedom, and they leaped and lumbered and slithered away into the night. Once more a lion, an ape, a snake, a crocodile, and a joyous dog. None of them thanked the unicorn, and she did not watch them go. Only the spider paid no mind when the unicorn called softly to her through the open door. Arachne was busy with a web which looked to her as though the Milky Way had begun to fall like snow. The unicorn whispered, "Weaver, freedom is better, freedom is better." But the spider fled unhearing up and down her iron loom. She never stopped for a moment, even when the unicorn cried, "It's really very attractive, Arachne, but it's not art." The new web drifted down the bars like snow. Then the wind began. The spider web blew across the unicorn's eyes and disappeared. The harpy had begun to beat her wings. calling her power in as a crouching wave draws sand and water roaring down the beach. A bloodshot moon burst out of the clouds, and the unicorn saw her, swollen gold, her streaming hair kindling, the cold, slow wings shaking the cage. The harpy was laughing. In the shadow of the unicorn's cage, Ruch and Schmendrick were on their knees. The magician was clutching the heavy ring of keys, and Ruch was rubbing his head and blinking. Their faces were blind with terror as they stared at the rising harpy, and they leaned together in the wind. It blew them against one another, and their bones rang. The unicorn began to walk toward the harpy's cage. Schmendrick, the magician, tiny and pale, kept opening and closing his mouth at her, and she knew that he was shrieking, though she could not hear him. "She will kill you! She will kill you! Run, you fool, while she's still a prisoner! She will kill you if you set her free!" But the unicorn walked on, following the light of her horn, until she stood before Seleno, the Dark One. For an instant, the icy wings hung silent in the air like clouds, and the harpy's old yellow eyes sank into the unicorn's heart and drew her close. "I will kill you if you set me free," the eyes said. "Set me free." The unicorn lowered her head until her horn touched the lock of the harpy's cage. The door did not swing open, and the iron bars did not thaw into starlight. But the harpy lifted her wings, and the four sides of the cage fell slowly away and down, like the petals of some great flower waking at night. And out of the wreckage the harpy bloomed, terrible and free, screaming, her hair swinging like a sword. The moon withered and fled. The unicorn heard herself cry out, not in terror but in wonder. "Oh, you are like me!" She reared joyously to meet the harpy's stoop, and her horn leapt up into the wicked wind. The harpy struck once, missed, and swung away, her wings clanging and her breath warm and stinking. She burned overhead, and the unicorn saw herself reflected on the harpy's bronze breast, and felt the monster shining from her own body. So they circled one another like a double star, and under the shrunken sky there was nothing real but the two of them. The harpy laughed with delight, and her eyes turned the colour of honey. The unicorn knew that she was going to strike again. The harpy folded her wings and fell like a star, not at the unicorn, but beyond her, passing so close that a single feather drew blood from the unicorn's shoulder. Bright claws reaching for the heart of Mommy Fortuna, who was stretching out her own sharp hands as though to welcome the harpy home. Not alone, the witch howled triumphantly at both of them. You never could have freed yourselves alone. I held you. Then the harpy reached her, and she broke like a dead stick and fell. The harpy crouched on her body, hiding it from sight, and the bronze wings turned red. The unicorn turned away. Close by, she heard a child's voice telling her that she must run. She must run. It was the magician. His eyes were huge and empty. And his face, always too young, was collapsing into childhood as the unicorn looked at him. No, she said, come with me. The harpy made a... Where are we? Sorry, I'm getting a little bit distracted. There's a lot more to read, people of Earth. I might come back with part 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. But anyway, I'm enjoying myself. So let's carry on, my darlings. Let me just find where we were at. The harpy made a thick, happy sound that melted the magician's knees. But the unicorn said again, come with me. And together they walked away from the midnight carnival. The moon was gone, but to the magician's eyes, the unicorn was the moon, cold and white and very old, lighting his way to safety or to madness. He followed her, never once looking back, even when he heard the desperate scrambling and skidding of heavy feet, the boom of bronze wings, and Ruth's interrupted scream. He ran, the unicorn said. You must never run from anything immortal. It attracts their attention. Her voice was gentle and without pity. Never run, she said. Walk slowly and pretend to be thinking of something else. Sing a song, say a poem, do your tricks, but walk slowly, and she may not follow. Walk very slowly, magician. So they fled across the night together, step by step, the tall man in black and the horned white beast. The magician crept as close to the unicorn's light as he dared, for beyond it moved hungry shadows, the shadows of the sounds that the harpy made as she destroyed the little there was to destroy of the midnight carnival. But another sound followed them long after these had faded, followed them into morning on a strange road, the tiny, dry sound of a spider weeping. Bless. I felt very guilty today because I killed a redback spider, a young one, and then I killed, the egg sacs of her babies. And I felt like a monster, I really did. I felt really monstrous. But She built it. She had her young in her little web inside one of my flower pots out in the front garden that, you know, passers by or visitors or children are likely to put their hands into. So she got murdered by me, and I can feel her weeping still. I said sorry to her as I killed her. What small recompense is that? A life, even a poisonous spider's life, is still a immense treasure amongst the gods and men. We forget that sometimes, don't we, in our haste to destroy and immolate. But one day the spider shall have her revenge on me, and the circle of life will continue. The tiny dry sound of a spider weeping. We're up to chapter 4, but I'm getting a bit dizzy and woozy, although that doesn't seem to be a very long chapter. I feel like going on and on and on. I'm probably a bit high from the B12. I said to Lynn, it didn't seem to do shit for me earlier in the day, but I've had a surge of energy, have I not? Doing my daily video logs of my journals, and now 2 hours and 11 minutes of reading this wonderful story. Ah well, let us carry on one more chapter. Let me see. Pardon me, how many chapters are there? 14 chapters. This much left to read, babies. But I'm enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying it. One more chapter and then I think I'll retire for the evening. As in, go to bed and go to sleep, babies. But I love this story so much. It's so lovely to be reminded. I haven't read this in many, many years. Chapter 4. Like a newborn child, the magician wept for a long time before he could speak. The poor old woman, he whispered at last. The unicorn said nothing, and Schmendrick raised his head and stared at her in a strange way. A grey morning rain was beginning to fall, and she shone through it like a dolphin. No, she said, answering his eyes. I can never regret. He was silent, crouched by the road in the rain, drawing his soaked cloak close around his body until he looked like a broken black umbrella. The unicorn waited, feeling the days of her life falling around her with the rain. I can sorrow, she offered gently, but it's not the same thing. When Schmendrick looked at her again, he had managed to pull his face together, but it was still struggling to escape from him. Where will you go now? He asked. Where were you going when she took you? I was looking for my people, the unicorn said. Have you seen the magician? They are wild and sea white like me. Schmendrick shook his head gravely. I have never seen anyone like you, not while I was awake. There were supposed to be a few unicorns left when I was a boy, but I knew only one man who had ever seen one. They are surely gone, lady, all but you. When you walk, you make an echo where they used to be. No, she said, for others have seen them. It gladdened her to hear that there had still been unicorns as recently as the magician's childhood. She said, a butterfly told me of the Red Bull, and the witch spoke of King Haggard. So I am going wherever they are to learn whatever they know. Can you tell me where Haggard is king? The magician's face almost got away, but he caught it and began to smile very slowly, as though his mouth had turned to iron. He bent it into the proper shape and time, but it was an iron smile. "I can tell you a poem," he said, "where all the hills are lean as knives and nothing grows, not leaves nor lives." I'm presuming that says lives. Where nothing grows, not leaves nor lives, but lives rhymes with knives. Oh well. Where hearts are sour as boiled beer, haggard is the ruler here. "I will know when I get there then," she said, thinking that he was mocking her. "Do you know any poems about the Red Bull?" "There are none," Schmendrick answered. He rose to his feet, pale and smiling. "About King Haggard, I know only what I have heard," he said. "He is an old man, stingy as late November, who rules over a barren country by the sea." That would be November in the Northern Hemisphere, my darlings. "Some say that the land was green and soft once before Haggard came, but he touched it and it withered. There is a saying among farmers when they look at a field lost to fire or locusts or the wind, as blighted as Haggard's heart. They say also that there are no lights in his castle and no fires, and that he sends his men out to steal chickens and bedsheets and pies from windowsills. The story has it that the last time King Haggard laughed, the unicorn stamped her foot. Schmendrick said, "As for the Red Bull, I know less than I have heard, for I have heard too many tales, and each argues with another. The bull is real, the bull is a ghost, the bull is Haggard himself when the sun goes down. The bull was in the land before Haggard, and it came, or it came with him, or it came to him. It protects him from raids and revolutions, and saves him the expense of arming his men. It keeps him a prisoner in his own castle. It is the devil to whom Haggard has sold his soul. It is the thing he sold his soul to possess. The bull belongs to Haggard. Haggard belongs to the bull." The unicorn felt a shiver of sureness spreading through her, widening from the centre like a ripple. In her mind the butterfly piped again. They passed down all the roads long ago, and the Red Bull ran close behind them and covered their footprints. She saw white forms blowing away in a bellowing wind and yellow horns shaking. "I will go there," she said. "Magician, I owe you a boon, for you set me free. What would you have of me before I leave you?" Schmendrick's long eyes were glinting like leaves in the sun. "Take me with you." She moved away, cool and dancing, and she did not answer. The magician said, "I might be useful. I know the way into Haggard's country and the languages of the lands between here and there." The unicorn seemed very near to vanishing into the sticky mist, and Schmendrick hurried on. Besides, no wanderer was ever the worse for a wizard's company, even a unicorn. Remember the tale of the great wizard Nikos. Once in the woods he beheld a unicorn sleeping with his head in the lap of a giggling virgin, while 3 hunters advanced with drawn bows to slay him for his horn. Nikos had only a moment to act. With a word and a wave, he changed the unicorn into a handsome young man, who woke, and seeing the astonished bowmen gaping there, charged upon them and killed them all. His sword was of a twisted, tapering design, and he trampled the bodies when the men were dead. And the girl, the unicorn asked, did he kill the girl too? No, he married her. He said she was only an aimless child, angry at her family, and that all she really needed was a good man. Story of my life. But I have reasons for being angry at my family, beloved ones. And a good man. How we yearn for a loving, good, kind man to create our own family. Are we right? Am I right? Well, I failed at that too at 19. It is what it is. Which he was, and then and always, for even Nikos could never give him back his first form. He died old and respected, of a surfeit of violets, some say. He never could get enough violets. There were no children. The story lodged itself somewhere in the unicorn's breath. The magician did him no service, but great ill, she said softly. How terrible it would be if all my people had been turned human by well-meaning wizards, exiled, trapped in burning houses. I would sooner find that the Red Bull had killed them all. Where are you going now? Schmendrick answered. Sorry, where you are going now, Schmendrick answered. Few will mean you anything but evil, and a friendly heart, however foolish, may be as welcome as water one day. Take me with you, for laughs, for luck, for the unknown. Take me with you. The rain faded as he spoke. The sky began to clear. Oh, my leg's starting to pinch. Ouch. And the wet grass glowed like the inside of a seashell.